At my brother's wedding, my dad demanded I hand over my farmhouse keys in front of 500 guests. When I refused, he slapped me so hard I fell to the floor. I called my husband, and 30 minutes later, when he walked in, the entire room was stunned. I still remember the night of my brother's wedding in Austin, Texas. People had been talking about it for weeks, saying it was going to be the grandest celebration the city had seen in years. The Mitchell family name carried weight, and my father wanted nothing less than perfection. Nearly 500 guests filled the ballroom of the most luxurious hotel in the city. Golden lights twinkled from the chandeliers above, white roses lined every corner, and the sound of glasses clinking blended with laughter and music. To anyone else, it was a picture of happiness. But to me, it felt like walking into a storm I hadn't seen coming. My name is Sophia, and I'm Ethan's older sister. Ethan was the groom that night, standing proud in a tailored suit, smiling as if the whole world belonged to him. He's 30, younger than me by 4 years, and I always protected him when we were children. But as we grew older, we grew apart, especially because of my father. Richard Mitchell is his name, 62 years old, a property developer who never saw people as people, only as tools or obstacles. For as long as I can remember, he wanted control. Over money, over property, and even over us. My mother, Olivia, has lived in his shadow for decades. She's 58, quiet, polite, and always on his side in public, even if her heart says otherwise. I walked into the ballroom that night wearing a navy blue dress, holding my head high. I knew my father, and I never saw eye to eye, but I came to honor my brother's big day, not to fight. Still, I carried the weight of something precious, the farmhouse keys. That farmhouse wasn't just a building to me, it was my life. I had turned that land outside Austin into a business, growing organic produce and renting out cabins. It was my independence, my identity, and my proof that I could stand on my own. As the family gathered on stage to welcome the guests, my father grabbed the microphone. His booming voice carried through the ballroom. "Sophia," he said, staring at me in front of everyone. "It's time to hand over the farmhouse keys to me. Everyone here knows your land belongs to this family, not just you." The music stopped. The laughter faded. I felt hundreds of eyes turn toward me, waiting for my answer. My stomach twisted, but I refused to shrink. I stepped closer and whispered so only he could hear, "No, Dad. The farmhouse is mine. I built that business with my own hands." His face darkened instantly. He wasn't a man who tolerated defiance, especially not in public. Before I could react, his hand struck across my face with such force that I stumbled and fell. Gasps shot through the room. My earring flew off and clattered on the floor. I felt heat burn on my cheek, but more than the sting of pain was the humiliation of falling in front of 500 guests. I lifted my eyes, hoping for anyone to step in. My mother lowered her gaze to the ground, pretending not to see. Ethan, my brother, shifted uncomfortably, torn between loyalty to his new wife and his father, and he chose silence. The crowd whispered. Some shook their heads, others simply stared, but no one dared to challenge Richard Mitchell. I pushed myself off the ground slowly, refusing to let tears roll down. My pride was stronger than the ache in my body. I straightened my dress, fixed my hair, and walked to the side of the stage without another word. My hands shook, but I pulled out my phone. With one deep breath, I made a call. The minutes dragged like hours. People whispered in hushed voices, throwing glances my way, wondering what I was doing. My father returned to smiling for the guests, pretending as if nothing had happened. But I saw the flicker in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought he had crushed me into silence. 30 minutes later, the ballroom doors swung open. The sound of the hinges made the chatter fade. Heads turned toward the entrance. And there he was, Michael Reyes, my husband. At 36, Michael carried himself with a presence that demanded respect. A successful lawyer, calm but fierce when it mattered most. He walked in wearing a sharp black suit, his steps steady and deliberate. The room went quiet, as if it knew something was about to happen. Michael's eyes found mine instantly. He didn't need me to explain, he already understood. He walked straight across the ballroom, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the stares. He reached me, placed his arm around my shoulders, and kissed my forehead in front of everyone. That single gesture was enough to silence the crowd completely. Then he turned to my father. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, calm yet firm. "This farmhouse you demand? It was signed to Sophia legally years ago. Not only is it hers, but she's the sole owner of the land you've been boasting about." Murmurs spread like fire across the room.
People gasped.
Some covered their mouths. Others leaned closer to whisper to their neighbors. My father's face went pale. His confident smile vanished. He stood frozen as Michael pulled out documents from his briefcase, papers proving my ownership, stamped and sealed by the law. In that moment, the atmosphere shifted. Where there had been pity and shame, there was now admiration. I could feel it in the eyes of strangers who moments ago looked at me with judgment.
They now saw strength.
My father's hand that struck me was now the symbol of his cruelty, not my weakness. Ethan avoided looking at me. His face burned with embarrassment, not for me, but for our father. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, caught between her husband and the daughter she had abandoned in silence. I stood taller than I had ever stood in my life. For the first time, my father had nothing to say. No threats, no shouts, no insults. Just silence. And in that silence, I realized I had turned my humiliation into dignity. But what I didn't know that night was that this was only the beginning. That slap in front of 500 guests was not just an attack on me. It was the spark that lit a fire. A fire that would uncover deeper betrayals, hidden truths, and choices that would change my family forever. And as Michael held me close, I understood one thing clearly. This battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The wedding carried on that night, but the joy had drained out of the ballroom. I could feel it in the air, heavy and awkward, like a storm cloud nobody wanted to acknowledge. Guests kept eating and drinking, but their whispers filled every corner. Some people offered me sympathetic smiles as they passed. Others avoided me altogether, as if siding with me meant inviting my father's wrath. Richard stood stiff, forcing a fake grin for photographs, but his eyes burned with quiet rage every time they landed on me and Michael. I didn't need him to say a word. I knew exactly what was on his mind. My father lived for control, and I had stripped it away from him in front of hundreds of people. He couldn't forgive that kind of humiliation. He'd rather see me broken than let me win. I knew then that the battle between us had crossed a line. This was no longer just about property or family honor. This was war. Michael stayed by my side all night. He didn't leave me for a second, even when I told him I could handle myself. At one point, he leaned down and whispered, "He'll come after you harder now. Be ready." I nodded because deep down I knew he was right. After the ceremony ended and the guests started to leave, my father finally approached me. His smile was gone now, his voice low so no one else could hear. "You've embarrassed me," he hissed. "This isn't over, Sophia. That land will be mine, one way or another." I met his eyes, steady and cold. "It's mine. You can't take what doesn't belong to you." He leaned closer, and for a moment I thought he might raise his hand again, but instead he whispered, "You'll regret this." Then he turned and walked away. That night, when Michael and I got back home, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to catch my breath. My cheek was still tender from the slap, but it wasn't the physical pain that hurt. It was knowing my own father had chosen to humiliate me just to prove his dominance. I looked at Michael and asked quietly, "Why does he hate me so much?" Michael sat beside me, his arm around my shoulder. "He doesn't hate you, Sophia. He hates that you can't be controlled. Men like your father survive on power. When someone stands up to them, especially someone they think they own, they can't handle it." I let his words sink in, but a part of me still wished my father had loved me enough to be proud of what I had built. My farmhouse wasn't just land, it was years of sweat and sacrifice. I had taken broken soil and turned it into something alive. And instead of pride, all I ever got was resentment. Days passed after the wedding, but the tension didn't fade. My father didn't call, and neither did my mother or brother. It was as if I had been cut out of the family overnight. My phone, once buzzing with cousins and relatives, now sat silent. The only person who stood firmly with me was Michael. He went to work during the day, but checked on me constantly, worried about what Richard might try next. One evening, about a week after the wedding, I got a visit at the farmhouse. I was alone, tending to the garden when I saw Ethan's car pull up. For a moment, my heart lifted. Maybe he had finally chosen to stand by me. He stepped out, looking uneasy, and walked toward me. "Sophia, can we talk?" I nodded, wiping the dirt from my hands. We sat on the porch, the warm Texas evening stretching around us. He didn't look at me right away. Finally, he sighed and said, "Dad's angry. Really angry. He says he's going to challenge the deed in court." I laughed bitterly. Let him try. Michael's already handled the papers. Everything is legal and airtight. Ethan finally met my eyes. "You don't get it. He won't stop. He'll use everything he has: money, connections, influence. He doesn't care if it destroys you." His words stung, not because they surprised me, but because I knew they were true. My father had spent decades building his empire. He had friends in law offices, judges who owed him favors, politicians who came to him for donations. If he wanted to drag me through the mud, he had the power to do it. "Why are you telling me this?"
I asked.
Ethan hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Because I don't want to see you hurt. But you need to understand, I can't go against him. He's my father too." There it was, the truth I had feared. My brother, the one I had once protected, wasn't going to protect me now. His loyalty was already chosen. I stood, my voice steady but cold. "Thank you for warning me, Ethan. But if you came here expecting me to surrender, you wasted your time. I won't give him the farmhouse. Not now, not ever." Ethan shook his head. "You're making this harder than it has to be." Then he left, his car disappearing down the dirt road, leaving dust in the air and a heaviness in my chest. That night, Michael and I talked late into the hours. "He's going to try something underhanded," Michael said. "Your father isn't the type to fight fair." I thought about Ethan's words, about the way my mother had refused to meet my eyes at the wedding. I felt alone, but at the same time, I felt something stronger rising inside me. "Then let him come," I whispered. "I'm not afraid anymore." But deep down, I was afraid. Not of losing the land, but of losing myself in this battle. Family is supposed to protect you, not destroy you. And yet, here I was, preparing for a war against my own blood. The following week proved Michael right. Letters began arriving from lawyers, accusing me of fraud, of mishandling property records, even of manipulating my father in the past. Lies, every single one of them. But they weren't just words, they were threats, crafted to break me down. I took the letters to Michael, who read them carefully, his jaw tightening. "He's pulling strings," he said. "But if he wants a fight, we'll give him one." It was in that moment I realized something important. This wasn't only my fight anymore. Michael had thrown himself into it fully, ready to defend me no matter the cost. His strength became my strength. Still, I couldn't shake the memory of my father's slap, the sting of betrayal, the way my mother turned her head and my brother chose silence. Those memories haunted me every time I closed my eyes.
But they also fueled me.
Because if Richard Mitchell thought I would break, he had underestimated me. And if he thought he could take what I built, he had no idea what was coming. The days after those letters arrived were some of the hardest I had ever faced. It felt like every morning I woke up to a new blow, a new trick from my father's side. First it was the accusations of fraud, then it was claims that I had stolen the land papers from him years ago. Each letter dripped with venom, designed not just to attack my ownership, but to crush my spirit. I spent nights sitting at my kitchen table with the documents spread out, my hands shaking as I tried to steady myself. The farmhouse that had once been my safe place now felt like the battlefield he had chosen. Michael was tireless. He stayed up late researching every detail of my deed, pulling old contracts, finding witnesses who had been present when I signed the ownership papers. His calm voice reassured me, but I could see the worry behind his eyes. One evening, he took my hand across the table and said, "Sophia, you need to prepare yourself. Your father won't stop until he's either defeated or destroys himself. People like him don't back down quietly." I nodded, though my throat tightened with fear. "I just don't understand," I whispered. "Why does he hate me so much? Why does he want to ruin me?" Michael's eyes softened. "It's not hate. It's pride and greed. He sees you as a threat because you proved you can succeed without him. And to a man like Richard, that's unforgivable." The weeks dragged on, each one heavier than the last. I avoided family gatherings, knowing my mother would stay silent and my brother would look away. Still, I hoped somewhere in my heart that maybe Ethan would change, that he would remember the sister who once shielded him from bullies, the sister who shared her lunch when he forgot his. But those hopes faded when I overheard that he had been seen visiting our father's office frequently. Loyalty had been decided, and it wasn't with me. One afternoon, I was at the farmhouse with 2 workers when a black car pulled up. My stomach dropped as I recognized the driver. It wasn't my father this time, but one of his closest associates, a lawyer named Paul Simmons. He was slick, with a smile that never reached his eyes. He handed me an envelope and said smoothly, "Miss Mitchell, consider this your last chance to do the right thing. Sign the transfer papers and avoid what's coming." I opened the envelope and felt my breath catch. Inside were photos, dozens of them, of me leaving different meetings around town, some with men I barely knew, others edited to look compromising. They were all fabrications, carefully designed to smear my name if they ever reached public eyes. I clenched the papers and glared at him. "Do you really think I'm going to fall for this? These are lies." Paul shrugged, his grin never fading. "Truth or lies doesn't matter. Perception does. Think of how quickly rumors spread. Think of how much your husband's career could suffer if these ended up in the wrong hands." My heart pounded, but I refused to show fear. "Tell my father this, I won't sign. And if he wants to drag me through the mud, I'll drag him with me." Paul's smile faltered just for a second before he climbed back into the car and drove away. I stood on the porch clutching those false photos, trembling with rage. I had expected a fight, but not one this dirty. That night, I showed the photos to Michael. He studied them quietly, then ripped them in half. "He's desperate," he said. "This means we're getting to him. But from now on, you don't go anywhere alone. Promise me." I promised, though inside, I felt a storm raging. My own father had stooped to lies and blackmail just to break me. I couldn't wrap my mind around it, and yet I knew I had to stay strong. The court battle finally began a few weeks later. Walking into that courtroom was one of the hardest things I've ever done. On one side, I sat with Michael and our legal team. On the other side, my father sat flanked by lawyers, his face calm and unreadable. My mother sat behind him, her eyes fixed on the ground. Ethan didn't show up at first, but later I spotted him slipping quietly into the back row, avoiding my gaze. The judge listened as both sides argued. My father's lawyers painted me as a manipulator, someone who tricked an old man into signing over property. They claimed I was unstable, that I had built my success by exploiting loopholes. Every word made my blood boil, but Michael kept me steady, whispering, "Don't react. Let the evidence speak." When it was our turn, Michael stood tall. His voice carried strength as he laid out the facts. He presented every document, every witness statement, every signature proving that the farmhouse was mine and had been mine for years. He showed that my father had no claim beyond his desire for control. The courtroom was silent as he spoke, his words cutting through the lies. Still, I could feel my father's eyes burning into me. When the session ended, he passed by me without a word, but the look on his face said everything. This wasn't over. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Michael slept beside me, but I couldn't close my eyes. My mind kept replaying the slap at the wedding, the whispers in the courtroom, the threat in Paul's smile. I wondered how far my father was willing to go. Was there a line he wouldn't cross? Or had he already crossed it the moment he struck me in front of everyone? Days later, I got my answer. It was early morning when I heard a noise outside the farmhouse. I walked to the window and saw shadows moving near the barn. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and called Michael, who was already on his way back from the city. By the time he arrived, the shadows were gone, but the damage was clear. Windows were smashed, tools were stolen, and hateful words were spray-painted across the walls. "Yours won't last." I sank to my knees, tears blurring my vision. This wasn't just about property anymore. This was personal, violent, dangerous. Michael wrapped his arms around me and whispered, "He's losing control. That's why he's lashing out like this. But we're not giving in, Sophia. No matter what, we fight." In that moment, I knew he was right. My father's war had turned ugly, but I wouldn't let him win. This farmhouse was my life, my independence, my proof that I was more than his shadow. And even though fear pressed heavy on my chest, something stronger burned in me, a resolve I had never felt before. Because if Richard Mitchell thought he could break me, he hadn't seen the fire he had lit inside me. The war was only getting darker, but so was my strength. And deep down, I knew the final confrontation was coming. The attack on the farmhouse changed everything. Until then, I had thought my father's war against me was about pride, control, and appearances. But that morning, as I stared at the broken glass, the spray-painted threats, and the ruined walls, I realized he was willing to destroy not only my spirit, but the place I had built with my own hands. I called the police, filed a report, and gave them every detail, though I knew deep inside no one would dare link it back to him. My father had influence in Austin, friends in high places who would sweep things under the rug for him. Michael didn't leave me alone after that. He worked from home when he could, and when he couldn't, he made sure I was never by myself. I could see the exhaustion in his face, but he never complained. "We'll get through this," he told me one evening as we sat by the fireplace. His voice was calm, but his hands gripped mine tighter than usual, as if he was holding on not just to me, but to the promise that he wouldn't let me fall. The court sessions dragged on for weeks. Each day felt like a lifetime. My father's lawyers threw every trick at us, twisting words, presenting false witnesses, even trying to paint me as unstable and unfit to manage the property. I sat there quietly through it all, remembering Michael's words, "Let the evidence speak." But the worst moment came when Ethan, my own brother, finally stepped forward as a witness. I had hoped, even after everything, that he wouldn't betray me completely. That maybe, just maybe, he'd find his voice and stand by the sister who had once stood by him. Instead, he took the stand and repeated my father's lies. He said I had manipulated the documents, that I had pressured our father when he was vulnerable. His voice was steady, rehearsed, like he had been coached word for word. I felt something inside me break as I listened. It wasn't anger, not at first. It was grief. The little boy I had once defended in schoolyards, the brother I had once shared secrets with, had chosen to stab me in the back to protect his place beside our father. When he stepped down from the stand, he didn't even look at me. That silence hurt worse than the lies. Michael squeezed my hand under the table, anchoring me. When it was our turn, he dismantled every false claim with facts, papers, and witnesses who had no reason to lie for me. His words were sharp, clear, undeniable. Piece by piece, he stripped away their story until the truth stood naked in front of everyone. But even after those victories, I felt no relief. The nights were heavy, filled with restless dreams of my father's slap, of Ethan's cold voice, of my mother's lowered eyes. Betrayal has a way of haunting you long after the moment passes. The final day of court arrived like the end of a long storm. The judge listened, silent and stern, as both sides gave their closing statements. When Michael finished, I looked across the room at my father. He sat stiff, his jaw clenched, his eyes locked on me with hatred so deep it almost made me shiver. The judge's decision was clear. The farmhouse and land belonged solely to me. The papers were valid, the ownership legal, the claims against me unfounded. My father's case was dismissed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Relief and victory crashed into me at once, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Michael pulled me into his arms as the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. My father's face twisted, his skin pale with rage. He stood abruptly, storming out of the room without a word. My mother followed quietly, her eyes meeting mine just for a second. I thought I saw guilt there, maybe even regret, but she turned away before I could be sure. Ethan left behind them, his head down, unable to look me in the eye. It should have felt like triumph, but instead it felt like ashes. Yes, I had won. Yes, I had protected the farmhouse and my dignity. But I had lost something too, the last fragile ties to a family that had chosen pride and greed over love. In the weeks that followed, my father cut me out of everything. He told relatives I was no longer his daughter. Family dinners went on without me. Invitations were no longer sent. My mother called once, her voice trembling, but she said little more than, "I hope you're doing okay," before hanging up quickly. Ethan didn't call at all. At first, the silence hurt more than the shouting ever did. But slowly, I began to see it differently. Their silence wasn't power, it was proof. Proof that I had broken free from their control, proof that I had chosen my own path even if it meant walking it alone. Life at the farmhouse returned to rhythm. I spent mornings walking through the fields, touching the crops I had planted with my own hands. Workers smiled at me with respect, neighbors came by with congratulations, and the community reminded me that family wasn't always blood. It was the people who stood beside you when the storms came. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, I sat with Michael on the porch. The air smelled of earth and wildflowers. He wrapped an arm around me and whispered, "You did it, Sophia. You stood tall. You didn't let him take what's yours." I leaned against him, the ache in my chest finally beginning to ease. "I lost my father, my mother, and my brother," I said softly. "But maybe I didn't really lose them. Maybe they were never truly mine." Michael kissed the top of my head. "You gained yourself, and that's worth more than anything." As the sky darkened and the stars began to appear, I thought back to that night at the wedding, to the sting of my father's slap, to the whispers of the guests, to the moment I chose to stand up instead of break. That night had felt like the end of me, but it had become my beginning. The farmhouse stood strong behind me, scarred from the attack, but still standing, just like me. It wasn't just a property anymore, it was a symbol of betrayal. Yes, but also of resilience. A reminder that no matter how much my family tried to destroy me, I had risen. And even though the wounds would never fully fade, I carried something stronger now.
Dignity. Strength.
Independence. Because in the end, my father was right about one thing. That night at Ethan's wedding, when he tried to strip me of everything in front of 500 guests, he changed me forever. But not in the way he wanted. He didn't break me. He made me unshakable.